this is how I feel about a lot of things. A lot of people change their minds once it happens to them. While that's good to have a change of perspective, we should all try and fight for these things before it just happens to us because it's happening to other people. It's to start fighting for it once it happens to you. I mean, I'm someone's daughter. I'm a real person. I'm someone's wife. I'm someone's friend. And to only care about it when it happens to one of your own, I think that's the whole problem with our society in general. And maybe what's wrong also with this, right to die, dying with dignity, that people, once they see it in front of them and it's their family member, then they change their mind and then it's too late because the law isn't there for them.
The Completed Life Initiative presents Voices of the Completed Life. In each episode, we share unprecedented conversations at the heart of the human experience. Our hosts dive into honest dialogue about mortality, loss, and grief, as we hear firsthand from individuals who seek to avoid life-limiting maladies in a body that may no longer serve them, and who instead aim to celebrate their lives as completed. These are stories that may challenge and surprise you. These stories are worth listening to. These are Voices of the Completed Life. Our host for this episode, Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel, MBE, is the inaugural program director for the Completed Life Initiative, who brings with her 13 years of experience in bioethics. Ms. Kiskaden-Bechtel is an innovative and strategic problem solver who has devoted her career to untangling oft misunderstood and oft stigmatized issues at the heart of human experience. Her expertise ranges from researching the impact of cultural traditions on the spread of HIV/AIDS in Swaziland to facilitating a CDC award-winning clinical research study in tuberculosis control at New York City public health clinics. In addition to directing the Completed Life Initiative, Sarah teaches as associate faculty in the Masters of Bioethics program at Columbia University, serves as a member of the Carson Tahoe Health Institutional Review Board, is editor-in-chief emeritus of Voices in Bioethics, an online journal, and is a member of the Empire State Bioethics Consortium. For this episode, we spoke to Rachelle Chapman, an author and activist who suffered a spinal cord injury in 2010 that left her quadriplegic. Rachelle has since become an outspoken voice in the disability community, as well as an advocate for the right to die. She has made appearances in national media such as The Today Show, Katie Couric, MSNBC, and Cosmopolitan magazine. She maintains a blog called Diary of a Wheel Girl, and her book titled The Promise, A Tragic Accident, A Paralyzed Bride, and the Power of Love, Loyalty, and Friendship was published in 2015. In this Voices of the Completed Life podcast interview, Rachelle dispels many of the arguments against medical aid in dying and explains how these misconceptions negatively impact the disability community. Rachelle also details how she became involved in the Right to Die movement through Edmund Tiryakian at Dying Right, North Carolina. By sharing Rachelle's story, this podcast episode aims to underscore the importance of highlighting personal narratives within the disability community. These narratives show that the right to live well as a person with a disability who has full decision-making choice over their bodily autonomy can also be compatible with the value that persons ought to have the option and therefore the right to die with dignity. We now turn to Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel's conversation with Rachelle Chapman.
Would you mind bringing me back to the beginning of where your life with wheels begins?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I was born able-bodied. I was a very active child, a teenager. I played tennis, I wakeboarded, I surfed a little bit here and there. And so I was a very, very active person, cheerleader, everything like that. I went to college, had a great time in college, and then I got engaged to my boyfriend. So I met him when I was 19 years old. He was my first boyfriend, Chris. And we have a really cool story about how he started, but we just met at a party in college, and I asked him where he was from. He said Virginia Beach, and that's where I was from too. And it turns out that we basically grew up in the exact same area, going to the same community pool, had crossed each other's paths, and just had never met until college. So that's how I met my now husband. But after college, we moved to just outside of Raleigh, and he proposed. We got engaged, and we really started our life together. I mean, we literally had like the white picket fence, you know, the yellow lab dog. We both had great jobs. I was working with senior citizens, actually. I was a program coordinator where I taught line dancing and aerobics and sitting weightlifting and things like that. I loved working with seniors, and that was my life. That was my job. He became a teacher, and, you know, he proposed. Of course, I said yes. We were supposed to get married about a year after the proposal, but 4 to 5 weeks before the wedding, I had a bachelorette party. And I remember everything to a T. I mean, I remember what I was wearing, the shoes I was wearing, and everything like that. That day I had tried on my wedding dress for like my last fitting. I did the whole like trial run where you get your hair done like you're going to get it done on your wedding day. Went shopping for these shoes that I needed for my bachelorette party, these cute white heels. And I remember having the best time with my friends. And we went out in Virginia Beach, where I'm from, and we went back to my friend's house, and we decided to go for a swim. Now, at this point, you know, our feet hurt, we were tired, and we just wanted to, you know, kind of slow down and take it easy after a fun night. But I do remember running upstairs, putting on my bathing suit, running downstairs, and I was standing on the side of the pool. And it was May. It was May 23rd, and so it wasn't quite super warm yet. So I hesitated because it was, you know, I was planning on it being really cold if I jumped in. I hesitated. And just in a playful gesture, one of my best friends came up behind me and pushed me into the pool. And the way I went in, I ended up going head first, hitting my head, and ended up actually having a spinal cord injury where I broke my neck. Instantly, I lost feeling. I lost all my function. And yeah, the EMT showed up, and I asked them straight up. I said, how many people walk away from something like this? And please tell me the truth. And this woman said, you know, if I'm being honest, one person in 30 years I've seen do that. And so in my mind, it felt very permanent. The doctor told me I was going to be a quadriplegic and that this was permanent. And that's just kind of started my life in wheels and my crazy story.
Oh my goodness. How has your spinal cord injury affected your sensation of, or your current sensation within your body?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a few big misconceptions, is that quadriplegic always means paralyzed from the neck down, no function whatsoever, and that paraplegic is waist down, and it's just as simple as that, you know, and the body is so much more complex than having two lines as far as neck down or waist down. And because people will see me moving my arms in videos and just be like, I had somebody say in a comment, I think the word you're looking for is paraplegic. You're not a quadriplegic. And I was like, I think I know my own diagnosis, but I've been to the doctor a couple times. It's been over a decade. But basically, I totally understand the misconception, but quadriplegic just means impairment in four limbs. So it doesn't mean you have nothing in four limbs. But like for me, for example, I broke the fifth and sixth bone down in my neck. So I'm considered a C5, C6 quadriplegic. And that means basically I have no finger function. I have very, very weak triceps, but I have very strong biceps, very strong shoulders, and pretty strong wrist function. I'm not on video right now, but I am, even though my hands don't work, I'm able to pick things up because of my wrist function. It's very hard to explain without video, but it's called tendinosis. So when you, basically, if you like let your hand go limp and then you lift your wrist back, as if you were giving somebody a high five, your fingers will actually bend. And it's very hard for somebody able-bodied to just like loosen up the muscles that work and not use them. But for me, when I lift my wrist, my fingers bend. And then in that way, I'm able to pick little things up. And so it's really interesting how the body works. But yeah, I feel tingling all over my body. The worst part that I experience is severe neuropathic pain. So if you've ever heard of somebody who has like phantom pain, if they've lost a leg, it might feel like that leg that's not there is like on fire. Our brains cannot compute that our limbs are not there anymore. It's very hard for our brains to understand that. And so I'm getting all these mixed signals to my body from my brain. And unfortunately, basically everywhere I have no actual feeling. Like somebody could like smack my leg and I won't feel it. But my brain does tell me at all times, hey, my right leg is on fire. Like it feels like, you know, my left leg is on fire. My foot feels like it's a brick, you know, with fire, like things like that. My brain can differentiate between which leg it is, but nothing's happening physically actually happening to my leg. Nothing's happening on the inside of my foot. It's just my brain telling my body, hey, that hurts.
Wow, that sounds so intense. And is this
Yeah.
something that you experience all the time, or does it come and go?
I mean, you have good days and bad days. So I would definitely say, like, if somebody asked me, would you rather walk or would you rather have the pain gone? And in a heartbeat, I would say the pain. I have figured out my life on wheels. I have figured out my life without hand function. I mean, there's a lot I can still do with my hands, but dealing with physical, horrible neuropathic pain is by far the worst kind of pain. I mean, it sounds so depressing to talk about, but basically the brain can create any pain that can physically happen. So let's say you got shot in the arm with a bullet, like literally shot with a gun. Your brain can make that pain happen. Even though nothing's wrong with your arm, it could feel like, you got shot or like your leg's literally like on fire. I mean, it's for sure the worst part. I mean, I do have medicine that helps and I do have a lot of distractions. And I have a lot of reasons to be happy, in my life. So there are certain days where that happy stuff does not overcome the pain. I mean, certainly, but overall, I live a pretty good life. I mean, considering, obviously. I know we'll get to the dying with dignity stuff, but, having that severe pain makes me a lot more sympathetic to somebody who might be terminal, who is dealing with pain like I am, if not worse.
Absolutely. That's a great segue to the right to die in the United States. And I know that you said you live in North Carolina, and unfortunately, medical aid in dying is not legal there currently. And earlier you mentioned the terminal prognosis as a requirement to be eligible for medical aid in dying in states where it's legal. So I'm curious, how did you learn about medical aid in dying, and what were your initial thoughts when you learned about it?
Really, it's just keeping up with the news. And I did see a movie, How to Die, gosh, what it was called, How to Die in Oregon, I believe it's called. And I saw it on Netflix. It was just out of the blue. I'm just kind of a documentary person. I love documentaries. It's something I never really thought about. And I had been injured at this point. I remember as a wheelchair user, I was just kind of scrolling around documentaries and I saw that documentary and it just like lit a fire under me and made me so angry, at the ways that this was being stopped or fought against. And it really just inspired me to want to make a difference. And then, like I said, having experienced such severe pain, even though I'm not terminal, I could relate to somebody who might be getting this pain, and being terminal and then it getting even worse than what I'm experiencing. But yeah, that movie just opened my eyes and it made me think of something I had never thought about before. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the perspective. And I'm so glad you've discovered How to Die in Oregon. That's
Yeah.
one of the hallmark documentaries of the Right to Die movement.
Yeah, it's so well done. It took me years after that movie to really be like, I'm going to like do my research and like really get into this. I looked it up in North Carolina and what was going on in North Carolina. I found some contacts. And so a good friend, Edmund, he runs the whole program and he is he is so knowledgeable. I really appreciate what he's done. And he was basically kind of like he gave me all the information and how I could be active and what he was doing and what I could do. And then I felt like I could really make a difference. And when I reached out, I did not have any idea of the information he was going to give me about why my role would be so helpful. Mm-hmm. Because there is, I don't know if you want to go into the segue yet, but there is an organization called Not Dead Yet. Mm-hmm. And it's run by people with disabilities who believe this law is basically coming after them. And that is something I never even crossed my mind. Like when I reached out to him, that was not on my radar whatsoever, that something like that existed and how I could very specifically help. Because again, I had no idea that was even a thing, that there was even people with disabilities that would fight against this. I could just go on a whole rant about this, but, yeah. So once he told me about Not Dead Yet and I did my research on Not Dead Yet, it was kind of infuriating to be perfectly honest. And I've seen a lot of the things that they've written and the things that they've put out there. And it's frustrating because I, as a person with a disability, do not feel whatsoever like this law has anything to do with me because I'm not terminal. I mean, that's just plain and simple. I'm not terminal. I have a long life to live. And a lot of the points they make are just not really valid.
There's the time-honored slippery slope argument. And are there additional elements that you've heard as well?
Well, they like to use the term ableism a lot, and they will use an example. This is one of their main examples. They say that doctors, when surveyed, 80% of them say that people with disabilities have a lower quality of life. And somehow that offends them. But if we're looking at reality, there's so many things that can make somebody's quality of life less than poverty, certain family dynamics, and yes, disability. I mean, I've talked to you about the pain that I deal in. That affects my quality of life. I was completely independent and now I'm not. That's going to affect my quality of life. It doesn't mean some doctor is going to be like, well, you need help from your mom and husband and you're a quadriplegic, but would you like to do this? Like, would you like to go and like end your life? Like, that's just not a thing. And so to me, just the fact that doctors would say, 80% of them believe that we have a lower quality of life does not mean that they believe we should just not be here whatsoever. I mean, if you surveyed doctors and said, do you believe somebody in poverty has a lower quality of life? I'm sure 80% or more would say, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that can affect quality of life, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the right to die or dying with dignity, because it doesn't say in the bill if you have a low quality of life. It says if you are 6 months terminal. So the argument of this quality of life or ableism or all of that is literally not part of the argument because it is not 6 months terminal. And I hate the slippery slope argument, because to me it's like, if it did come to that, if you feel like it says, hey, anybody with a disability can do this, which it would never happen, then come fight for it. But right now it has nothing to do with us as far as our disability. And I cannot imagine making this bill about me while other people were suffering. I mean, to me, it just seems very selfish to make an argument about yourself and your own disability when there's people dying right now in severe pain. Their cognitive ability is going, their body is going, and they're in severe pain, and they're dying in a way that is just not fair. It's not right, and it's inhumane. And then Not Dead Yet wants to sit here and make it about them. And it frustrates me.
So how do you regard, people who say like, oh, well, it's never right to help someone die, or that just assisted dying is unnecessary or perhaps immoral?
Well, as far as the doc, another thing that the Not Dead Yet will say is that it wouldn't be honoring the oath that a doctor takes. And one of those parts of their oath is do no harm. And to me, letting somebody die without any, real help and pain, that would be doing harm. To me, that would go against the oath to just be like, well, there's nothing we can do for you. You're just 6 months terminal. Sorry. That would be wrong to me and immoral to me. Yeah, there's so many arguments, and certainly religion and spirituality is part of the argument. I don't believe any law should have religion in the conversation whatsoever. That's just America. We're not supposed to make laws based on religion and spirituality. We're supposed to make it completely free of that. And if that's somebody's only argument, certainly if that's only a politician's only argument, to me, it's not a valid one. So as far as the doctors, I don't think it's a profit thing whatsoever. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what Not Dead Yet believes. Do they believe they're just going to go for a regular doctor's visit, and then a doctor's just going to bring this up and say, hey, do you want to do this? In their brains, I'm just curious what they believe that the steps would be to make that happen when they're not seeking that. Mm-hmm. And then another thing is they use, like I said, the term ableism. To me, it's ableist to believe that doctors and society could just convince us to want to pass away, as if we don't have our own minds and our own thoughts and our own passions and ability to make our own decisions. That to me is ableist, because that's one of their big arguments, is that, oh, they're just going to be able to convince us or pressure us to want to do this. To me, that's ableist in its own. To kind of make the argument that the world is ableist, but we can't make our own decisions. We're just going to be coerced. We're going to be pressured, to me is ableist, because nobody could pressure me or coerce me. I'm a quadriplegic, and I know that that's not something I want, and I can make my own decisions. And I know that I wouldn't qualify anyways because I'm not terminal. So I kind of took some quotes from Not Dead Yet. They have a bunch of different articles on their page, and this is one of them. And I think I talked about a few of these things, but this is their quote. If law allowing for, they use the term assisted suicide, which I hate, by the way, but I'm just going to read their quote. If law allowing for assisted suicide is passed, many people could feel pressured to die because of ableism. Disabled people are already seen by some as a burden who might as well be dead. Recent research shows that more than 80% of surveyed doctors think disabled people have an inferior quality of life. There is not enough interest in getting adequate home supports for people who need them. And that is a quote. That is what they have said. And literally every sentence I have an argument for. But, as far as ableism goes, again, it has nothing to do with being 6 months terminal. They even end it by saying there's inadequate home supports for people who need them. Absolutely. That is 100% true. We need more home supports. We need better health care. We need more access to a lot of things for people with disabilities. But again, that's a whole separate argument that we should be putting our hard work into and not kind of applying it to, dying with dignity. So it's a little frustrating, but yeah, they say a lot of things in here about feeling pressured to die, literally. And I think I have more autonomy over my own body and my own wants and my own needs to not be pressured to want to die because some doctors think that I have, an inadequate life, which again, a lot of people have quality of life issues for a lot of different reasons, and a doctor isn't just going to suggest that you end your life. It just doesn't work like that. So it's frustrating, but yeah, that's what they have to say. A lot of their arguments have to do with, there not being enough care. There's not enough there to help our quality of life, and that's absolutely true. As far as the fight for healthcare, I will stand with the people and members of Not Dead Yet and say this country is not fair to us because we don't have the healthcare that we need. It's affecting our quality of life, and that is an okay argument. That's totally valid, and I would completely stand with them on that. But we're talking about, in my opinion, two completely different things. I think I also read a blog from somebody on Not Dead Yet that said that they had certain medications and different healthcare needs that keep them alive, basically. They said if that was taken from them, these things that kept them alive, whether it was mechanics or medicine or things like that, if that was taken from them, then they would be terminal and then they would qualify for, dying with dignity or dying right. And my opinion is that is not a dying with dignity problem. That's a healthcare problem. If it's the healthcare that's taking all that away from you and that would ultimately take your life, that's a healthcare problem. And I think a lot of people, this is how I feel about a lot of things. A lot of people change their minds once it happens to them. Mm-hmm. And while that's good to have a change of perspective, we should all try and fight for these things before it just happens to us because it's happening to other people. So I remember having a discussion with a guy online. I did a whole Reddit thread about my spinal cord injury where it was Ask Me Anything, and stem cell research came up. And this guy was against stem cell research. And I said, if your daughter was a quadriplegic and living in pain and there was nothing else but stem cell research to help her, would you be for it? And he said, yes. And I was like, well, if you wait until something like that happens to you, it's too late. It's to start fighting for it once it happens to you. I mean, I'm someone's daughter. I'm a real person. I'm someone's wife. I'm someone's friend. And to only care about it when it happens to one of your own, I think that's the whole problem with our society in general. And maybe what's wrong also with this, right to die, dying with dignity, that people, once they see it in front of them and it's their family member, then they change their mind and then it's too late because the law isn't there for them.
You're listening to Voices of the Completed Life, a podcast brought to you by the Completed Life Initiative. Learn more about the Completed Life Initiative and donate to our cause at www.completedlife.org. We provide groundbreaking presentations about the right to control one's own end-of-life experience. We explore legislative options for expanding the eligibility criteria for medical aid in dying within the United States and look to other countries around the globe in support of the right to die. We empower people to ask, what does it mean to live a completed life? Spread the word about the completed life on social media by using #CompletedLife. And now, back to our episode.
A theme that has emerged on our podcast is sharing about an experience with either a family member, a friend, or someone in your community who has died. What was your earliest experience with someone dying? And what was your first impression or reaction to their dying?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of personal experience yet, thank gosh. But I did have a grandfather who did get cancer. It was very scary at the time, obviously. And he ended up having an accident where he passed away before the cancer was what took him. Then he was on life support, and we were all in the room when we decided that it was time for him to go. It was very difficult to be there. And as far as, the cancer, I'm grateful that's not what took him because that would have been far, far worse.
In regard to medical aid in dying, what would you say is the most common misunderstanding in various communities, including the disability community?
They don't really know the safeguards that are there. It's not like you just have one doctor and then it's done. I mean, at least in the North Carolina bill, you do have to have a physician. You do have to be mentally competent and you have to have a hospice evaluation. So you have more people involved than one person because that's their fear, that you have this one doctor that believes your quality of life is so bad. But again, it would be going against the bill and it would be completely illegal for them to move forward with somebody with a disability if they weren't terminal. But there are safeguards in place beyond that include a hospice evaluation and being mentally competent and having to be the one to verbally say this is what you want. And something I haven't really talked about yet, this is kind of a weird example, but I had a dog about a year ago. His name was Petey, and he was my best friend. And he was 13 years old. He was barely able to walk. Cognitively, you could tell he was going because he would just bark at nothing constantly. He wasn't sleeping well, and he was in a lot of pain. And it was time for him to go. I couldn't see him suffer anymore. And we picked a date and we chose to put him to sleep, and we were all there with him, wrapped in a blanket with him when he went, and he wasn't in pain anymore. And the way he went was painless. And I think that's something a lot of us will do for our animals. We have that there for our dogs and our cats, and we have a way to put them to sleep peacefully so they're not in pain anymore when it comes to end of life. So why is it okay for our dogs and our animals, but it's not okay for ourselves and our humans and our family? So that's just something I've thought about a lot.
In the advocacy realm, we often look at other countries outside of the United States for what's going on around the world. And a good contrast to the US model of, a terminal prognosis of 6 months or less is the Canadian model, where they have two different tracks, and track 2 is unbearable and irremediable suffering,
right,
without the terminal prognosis. So that speaks a little bit more to what you were saying about, your dog was suffering unbearably. What are your thoughts on the track 2 in Canada?
Yeah, so I agree with it. I mean, I do. I believe that should be there. Again, if it doesn't affect you, you know what I mean? Like if it's something you don't want for yourself, that's fine. But somebody can advocate for themselves. They have to be, again, mentally there, cognitive to be able to make this decision. And I think if somebody is suffering so bad and that they literally can't go on, unfortunately, the alternative to not allowing dying with dignity is somebody doing it themselves. And that's extremely horrible. It's a painful way to go. It's a scary way to go. It's a traumatic way for your family. So I just feel like I'm looking at like both sides, and the alternative is worse, than the law. So, I mean, you asked me like my experience, and even though I had a grandfather who had cancer and ended up dying from a different injury, though I had not seen it in my relatives quite yet, I'm like, one day that could be my relative, one day that could be me. And even though it hadn't happened to me yet, I know that it's happening to millions of other people. And that one day that could be my position. And so that's why I'm like, well, now it's time to fight for something. Now it's time to fight, because when it comes to my family and my mom, when she's, 20 years, 80 years old or things like that, I want the law to be there.
Absolutely. Now I would like to pivot a little bit towards the notion of completed life and how that ties into you and your story, and, to the extent that you've considered it, of course. And so, we were just talking about the notion of being terminal for accessing medical aid in dying. And so I'm curious, have you thought about what you might want at the end of life, if at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, this hasn't happened to me or my family yet, but I've seen it happen, whether it was in a documentary or stories that I've read or other people that I know have experienced it. But as far as I go, when I get older, especially as a quadriplegic, and my function is deteriorating, and I'm in this much pain, and honestly, the pain is only expected to get worse. I mean, no, it's not going to ever just go away or get better. If I'm experiencing all these things and I'm just declining and declining, and the doctor tells me you are 6 months terminal, it would be extremely difficult to just kind of life take its course as far as me just getting worse and worse and having more pain and possibly dying unexpectedly in that much pain. The pros of having the end of life option when you are 6 months terminal there's so many things. I mean, you have the ability to say goodbye to your family in a cognitive way, and it's a peaceful, painless way to go, where otherwise the other option would be extremely painful. And whether it's I get cancer, whether it's my disability, whether it's, whatever it is that in my end of life makes me terminal and I'm deteriorating, that option would be extremely comforting, just to know it's there. Even if I didn't want it, even if I didn't like choose to do it, and I just having it there, I think would give me a lot of comfort one day if I ever am terminal.
Within the notion of a completed life, we always say that a completed life is unique to each person, and it will inherently look different to you, to me, to everyone. So having that unique quality is really important to underscore. And I'm curious, to folks who may or may not agree with your own vision, what would you say to them if they said, that doesn't really sound resonant with me, or why do you believe so passionately about what you believe in?
I mean, it's an argument that I've said for a lot of things, but if somebody doesn't want that for themselves or their own family, then don't do it. That's you and your own family. You don't have to do it. This isn't like a requirement. Again, like I've said with Not Dead Yet, no one's going to convince you to do it. It's your choice. The law will be there, but if you don't want it for you, your mom doesn't want it, your dad doesn't want it, your grandparents don't want it, then fine. But there are people out there who are suffering that might want it, and it has nothing to do with you and your opinions. So, I mean, that's just kind of like that sounds really like not nice, but I mean, honestly, if it doesn't affect you and it doesn't affect your family and you don't want to do that, you don't have to. And I guess that's just my argument for a lot of things, honestly. But certainly for this, if I feel like it's right for me, or we feel like it's right for our family, or my mom, when she's 80, feels like it's right for her, it should be there for her because it should be her right.
We were wondering what you hope to achieve with your activism in the Right to Die space. You've touched upon it a little bit, but can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, talking with Edmund, we've talked about different ways that I can move forward and make a really big impact. I want to talk to Disability Rights North Carolina. It's its own disability group. It's not Dead Yet. They are a neutral group that's not their main focus. But if I can get them on board and get them to understand, they could possibly join me in being the counter argument to Not Dead Yet and other organizations like them. Also, I'd like to go speak to representatives. So Edmund is going to kind of help set things up because I want to be another visual for them. I mean, it's very intimidating for a bunch of politicians to see a bunch of wheelchairs lined up, of Not Dead Yet, saying you guys are coming for us. If you make this law, this is, again, this is ableist. That's very difficult for a politician to just be like, I don't think so, and like past that. So I think it's important that I'm there as another person to be like, no, it's not like that. It's this, and so I would like to talk to some, one-on-one with some politicians and honestly just all around just hopefully change some minds, because I think politicians are scared, especially Republican conservative ones. But what they don't realize is that when you do a survey, there is the majority of citizens, including Republicans, agree with this. So it really shouldn't be a scary thing. But it is, I get it. But I think with, more talking and more conversation, I'm just hoping we can change some minds.
It sounds like you view it as a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, it should be.
And also another question is, especially looking at the particulars of legislative advocacy within New York State up in Albany, I know that certain disability rights groups are privately in support of the New York bill that's currently being recirculated for, I think, the eighth time. It's been a long time. It's been a long and hard slog, but they often will be very supportive in private, but neutral and perhaps in opposition in public. Right. Do you have any sense of why they might be so
quiet or secretive about it?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not honestly sure, except when I talked to Edmund, he was like, if you come out publicly, like with your face and your argument and you say these things, there might be people in the disability community against you. They may use your name as an example to kind of say negative things. And I think that, I'm obviously a public figure in the disability community. And so a lot of people with disabilities know who I am, and I have a lot of followers from these people. And, me being public may lose me some. There might be people against what I say, and that just is what it is. Honestly, I'm just a very outspoken person, and if I believe in something, I'm going to say it, and I would hope that any disability groups would do the same. So it's unfortunate that they're kind of privately doing it because that doesn't make a difference. If you support something, you fight for it. Just kind of believing in it and just kind of being neutral and not really moving forward with it or being proactive isn't going to change things. So
absolutely. And I agree with you 100%. And you're right. Supporting something privately, but not actually supporting it publicly isn't really supporting it.
Yeah, it's like completely useless. It doesn't do anything to like believe something in your head and not do something about
It's completely ineffective. Well, Rachel, you are such a courageous leader in this movement, and thank you so much for being an incredible public advocate. As we conclude today, what would you like people listening in on this episode to take away from our conversation?
Well, my hope is that maybe with this interview and in general, me being public on my, social media, that I can be kind of like the first one to really step forward and be super outspoken about it. And hopefully maybe these groups you're talking about will be like, okay, well, she's done it. She's made the step. Maybe we should just join in, so that's my hope for sure.
Absolutely. I really admire your bravery and courage in stepping forward and using your voice to pave the way for others to do the same.
Yeah, let's hope for sure, right?
You just heard Diary of a Wheel Girl, the story of Rachelle Chapman. We would like to thank Rachel for being such a strong voice in the Right to Die movement and for her ongoing efforts to bring improved healthcare and support to the disability community. Rachel's book, blog, and TV appearances are all linked in the description of this episode. She was also featured in the World of Champions map, published by the World Federation of Right to Die Societies. You can follow Rachel on social media at Rachel's_wheels on Instagram and Facebook.com/Rachel and Chris. If you would like to share a response to Rachelle Chapman's story, please feel free to reach out to us on our social media platforms at Completed Life. Additionally, if you are interested in sharing your story of a completed life on this podcast, whether for yourself or a loved one, please reach out to us via email at info@completedlife.org. This has been Voices of the Completed Life. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us at www.completedlife.org. That's completedlife.org, where you'll find extensive video content regarding resources on aid in dying, featuring discussions led by expert clinicians, bioethicists, policymakers, and end-of-life doulas. At the Completed Life Initiative, we advocate for a person's right to direct their own end-of-life care. Take control over your transition, your life, your choice.